back, everyone, to the Progressive Brothers podcast. This is episode 57. I'm here with my co-host, Renaissance Man.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. Peace to everyone in the chat. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share the video as well.
Also, make sure you follow us on Twitter at Progressive Brothers, Brothers_podcast. So, two items on the agenda today. The infrastructure bill and the census. Let's start off with the infrastructure bill. So, infrastructure bill, White House is basically saying this is a bipartisan victory for them, for Biden at least. And they didn't get everything that they wanted, but they got something out of it. And so what I want to do is cover a few of the talking points about the infrastructure bill that seems to be getting most of the attention right now. And broadband is the main thing that they seem to be really toting right now. $65 billion in investment in improving the nation's broadband infrastructure. It's a smaller investment than the $100 billion Biden initially wanted. So the legislation aims to help lower the price households pay for internet service by requiring federal funding recipients to offer low-cost, affordable plans by creating price transparency and by boosting competition in areas where existing providers aren't providing adequate service. I'm not a big fan of this. Okay, so let me take that back. I like broadband upgrades, but I don't like the idea that Comcast, Verizon, and AT&T and T-Mobile and these other private entities seem to get all of the billions of dollars of investment into it. They're basically going to be the ones going out there to upgrade the infrastructure, but in reality, taxpayers' dollars should not have to go to these private entities to actually upgrade infrastructure that largely could be owned by, your city municipalities. Your state municipalities could actually own a lot of this. But moving away from that, I would say that upgrading broadband infrastructure is long overdue. South Korea, $10 a month for internet. Go back 10 years ago, that was a very common thing. High-speed internet for them was just normal as drinking water. Here, if you want high-speed internet, and you live in the sticks, good luck. What's your take on this, Renaissance, man?
Yeah. I think definitely COVID exposed that. I remember hearing about different counties that basically had to have someone drive the bus out into the middle of the county and set it up as a Wi-Fi hotspot every so far as distance to get students access when all the learning went online.
Yep. So
I think that sort of brought it to the forefront, because truth be told, I would have never known that people don't have access to internet in the sticks like that. It's just not something that you really think about until, like I said, you hear a story like that, like, oh, because I guess you sort of take your phone being a Wi-Fi hotspot and be able to go into Starbucks, wherever, to get access to Wi-Fi. So I think that's a plus. The one thing I thought maybe with it getting scaled back is I wonder where Starlink with Elon Musk, where that whole thing played in, as far as I know that was essentially his goal by launching all these small satellites into orbit that would basically be able to give people access to Wi-Fi, not just in rural areas in America, but all over the world. So I wonder if there's funding in there for that as well, to sort of support that, or like you said, if it's more of, hey, just traditional, and these traditional providers like Verizon, Comcast, AT&T, people like that, those are the main people who this is going to go to as far as contracts and actually owning the infrastructure.
So Starlink is used for what we call last mile, meaning that where the hard line stops, the Starlink would actually pick up the rest of the way. It fills in that last mile gap. And so Starlink, or Elon Musk's attempt to plaster the whole entire lower Earth orbit with these cube-based satellites providing internet, he already got funding for that. That's how he was able to get it up there in the first place. I don't think that is exactly what people in the United States really need. I think that's really for other, developing nations that don't have infrastructure at all. And so this in the bill itself is actually addressing that real last mile issue, where you have people in Colorado in the mountains who don't have high speed internet because they're still using either dial-up or they're using satellite, right? They're using dish TV to really get internet service, and when it's overcast, and it's cloudy, service is crappy. That's a problem, right? And so I think the infrastructure bill, the broadband infrastructure bill, addresses that issue, right? That last mile in America where people don't have that high speed aspect. DSL, for that matter, right? DSL goes 19,000 feet, which is a little over 2 miles. So that last mile is what they're trying to fix. So number 2 would be electric school buses. I'm not a big fan of this. I don't think now we need electric school buses. It's just not a priority right now. I think what we do need is low emission buses with compressed natural gas, but I don't think we need electric school buses. We don't even have the infrastructure for it. That's number 2. And number 3, I think the money is better spent in other places, rather than electric school buses. I don't see the real value in that. Maybe an electric, like a commercial tractor trailer or something like that. That makes a lot more sense. But when you have school buses that have short stops, and where do they plug in at? Because as far as I can see, if kids don't even have access to PPE for COVID, I think electric school buses are the last thing that they probably need to have at this point. So,
no, I know where you're coming from. The only thing I can think of is it may be one of those incentives to really get people in the auto industry to buy into the whole EV movement, in the sense of, hey, if you start mandating buses and start really pushing for all basically government vehicles to become EV, you sort of really, what you're really doing in my mind is sort of giving the manufacturers the business case to say, okay, if I have the government saying that, hey, we're going to put all this in EV, I have now the incentive from a business standpoint to go and make all the investments, at least on the commercial side, to make commercial type of vehicles. Just because with obviously with cars, you have incentives on that side, but with commercial vehicles, people aren't going to buy them as often. How often does a school a county buy school buses or things like that? So I think that could be some of what they're trying to think, is just from a business standpoint getting buy-in. But no, I do know what you mean of, hey, there are other things that could have been more pressing, and this could be something you circle back on. Not to mention the fact, I like you said, low emissions, because I saw something the other day about it was hydrogen operated vehicles, because they were talking about, hey, basically they put no carbon whatsoever into the atmosphere if you're coming at it from a climate change standpoint. So
yeah, the bigger the application with hydrogen, the better. With cars, it's a little bit difficult. Like Toyota and BMW have been trying to push hydrogen, but because cars are so small, there's only so much capacity that they can have. With buses and trucks and things like that, it makes a lot more sense. And cruise ships, that makes a lot more sense because the capacity is so much bigger, in energy. So that makes a lot of sense. $5 billion for zero emission clean buses, and $2.5 billion for ferries. The only people who ride ferries are white people. I mean, at this point, where are they riding these ferries from? New York? $2.5 billion does not make a whole lot of sense right now during a pandemic where people are not traveling at all. I would have taken that out of the bill. I just don't see any value in that right now. Initially, that's something you put down the line, 2025, 2028, 2032. We can have a different conversation then, but for right now, I would have taken that off the table.
Now when you say ferries, the thing that comes to mind We're talking about like ferries, as in like people want to ride and just like ride around and see the city. Or when I think ferries, I think like, hey, you literally have to drive your car onto this if you want to get to the other side of the road type of ferry.
Yeah. These ferries are like in New York City to get from one island to the other. That's really what they're talking about. I don't see how that even gets implemented into it, because where was the demand for ferries before? Ferries have not really changed in the last 20 or 30 years. They're pretty much the same. I'm not sure why that got included in there, but the people who actually ride them are majority white. So it doesn't really there's no trickle down from that. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Could be obvious. You obviously have to keep in mind too. Some of this stuff is pork barrel spending. Some of these people are going to get reelected off of this infrastructure bill.
Yeah. The bill would invest $7.5 billion to build a nationwide network of plug-in electric vehicle chargers along highways to enable long-distance travel, as well as within communities where people live, work, and shop. Yeah, if people can't afford a Tesla, they can't afford an electric vehicle. I don't know how critical it is to have that infrastructure up and going with $7.5 billion. I think states should allocate their own proposals for infrastructure like that. Like I said before, Montana and Nebraska, in these places where there's North Dakota, South Dakota. I don't think that they're worried about having plug-in electric vehicle chargers along their highways. I think they have bigger issues, such as the ability to move snow off the road. They don't even have the infrastructure for that. So I don't think that plugging in or building out a network of plug-in electric vehicle chargers is a priority along highways out there in the upper north and in the Midwest. I think that should be determined by the states. I think they should come up with each state should come up with their own sort of infrastructure for electric vehicles because they already charge excise tax and these other sort of gas taxes and whatnot. That stuff should be already paid for by the states, not so much by an infrastructure bill.
I actually like this one, with the caveat of I'm hoping, I've been following this personally. So if right now, if you buy an electric vehicle, depending on the vehicle, there's a $7,500 EV tax credit that you can get at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, that right now is restricted to the number of cars sold. So, for example, like, you can't use that credit with Tesla anymore because they've met their quota. Like, I believe the quota is like 200,000 cars, and then once that 200,000 is done, if you go and buy a Tesla, you don't have access to the credit. Now, there's been talk and there's been revision, and I believe they actually made some revisions to it, but obviously it's got to get through legislation. There was talk of trying to raise that amount to $12,500, as well as trying to make that, instead of a tax credit, making something that you can get as an initial discount when you first buy the vehicle. So if that does find its way into law, then I actually do like this, in the sense of it'll really incentivize, in my mind, getting people into EVs, which is going to be needed to slow climate change. And then I also like it from the perspective only from the one concern I have, if you let states do it on a state by state basis, I feel like you run into the possibility of, states don't coordinate, and you can go from one state to the other, and there's not an EV charging station in between. Versus, I hope if it at least comes from a federal level, there's some centralized planning where you can at least say, okay, we can at least plan it out where there's at least, an EV charging station every 100 miles or something along those lines. And then also, just big picture, when we look at China, I know last year, China put more EV chargers in the month of December than the US did all of last year. So that is the one positive I like. Like I said, I think you're going to need a and a real incentive to get people into electric vehicles. And that's where I hope you see movement on the tax legislation. And if that comes through, then I actually like this. I think it's a win.
Yeah, I thought the whole entire purpose of like reducing carbon emissions and things of that nature was to get people out of their vehicles and not to actually produce more vehicles, right? And so I think for me, I'm mixed on this because they've had years to do all of this and they just didn't do it for whatever reason. However, the people who are going to benefit the most is only one demographic of people, and the rest of the people just won't benefit at all, right? And so going into number 3, addressing racial discrimination in infrastructure. The legislation contains $1 billion to reconnect communities, disproportionately Black neighborhoods that were divided by highways and other infrastructure, according to the White House. It would fund planning, design, demolition, and reconstruction of street grids, parks, or other infrastructure. So in the previous, they, to your point, that it gets people out of these gas-based vehicles, these combustion-based vehicles, into electric vehicles, and helps, save the environment. But on the other hand, this racial discrimination in infrastructure is built right into the bill, because the community that's going to benefit the most from the infrastructure upgrades are the communities that have already been benefiting in the first place from an electric vehicle standpoint. And so I think when we have this conversation about addressing racial discrimination in infrastructure, it shouldn't be about just the past, but what's going to happen in the future. Because if you're talking about rolling out smart cities and rolling out all of these connected devices and electric vehicles and so on and so forth, autonomous vehicles and so on and so forth, where do Black people fit in that conversation and the design and development of all of this? And so although they're talking about addressing racial discrimination in infrastructure, a lot of that seems to be built into the design of the infrastructure bill. It seems like they pull Black people in when on one part of it, and then on the other part of it, they're kind of left out of it. And they seem to get the least amount because it's $1 billion to reconnect communities, when originally Biden called for $20 billion of investment into this. And so he got $19 billion less than what he had actually proposed.
Yeah, that seems to be the theme with all the infrastructure bill, is that the equity piece really was a lot of it that got chopped out of, unfortunately. Which I'm not surprised when you were talking about a bipartisan deal like that. I mean, you already see the uproar behind CRT, and I mean, if that stuff was kept in there, not that I'm saying it should have been pulled out to appease anyone, but I'm sure someone on the right would have been saying, oh, they're writing CRT into legislation now. So I mean, I can't say when bipartisanship always comes up. Unfortunately, that seems to be what it really means, is that if there's something in it for Black folks or minorities in general, that's probably going to be one of the first things that gets put on the chopping block.
Yeah. So if we go into number 4, which is new tax regulations on cryptocurrencies. I'm a crypto guy myself, big tech guy myself. I think that this is kind of cryptocurrency hodlers, Bitcoin hodlers. They tend not to have any political capital, so to speak. And so it's easy to punch down on cryptocurrency hodlers because no one's there to represent them and no one wants to touch them. They're claim to be, because they're a hot potato. No one wants to be caught up with, not paying taxes on cryptocurrencies. And so a provision tucked away at the end of the Senate bill would impose new tax reporting requirements on cryptocurrency transactions. A move that congressional estimates say could raise $28 billion in new revenue to help pay for the infrastructure package. The legislation could have sweeping ramifications for cryptocurrency investors and innovators. Yeah, I just think that this is going to force people to kind of hide their earnings and things like that in other places, and it really just. I get why they're doing it, but I just think that you can't get any new growth out of these markets if people think that their earnings are going to be tucked away from themselves and handed over to the government.
Yeah. I think people. I mean, to me, it's not surprising. I mean, once I saw all the everybody tweeting about crypto and putting their status, and I was like, oh, it's if you go 2 years back, 3 years ago, only really tech savvy people knew about cryptos were in it like that, and now it's become so mainstream. I knew it was only a matter of time before regulations got stepped up, and they got a lot stricter on the reporting requirements. It depends how much that number could be exaggerated, because if you're talking about something like Robinhood, where people are trading, I would imagine that their reporting requirements were already pretty stringent, just because they do stocks and other things. So they probably just have treated it like that. Mm-hmm. Along those lines, it may be some of these other platforms that people use that are specifically just crypto based that this may really go and hit, as well as I think mainly this is honestly going to be geared at probably more of lower value type of transactions, in the sense, because I mean, we've seen with the IRS, unless you have a change in the audit policy where you're seeing fewer and fewer high net worth individuals being audited, then this is just going to be something that goes after kind of retail type investors.
Yep, couldn't agree more. Number 5, delaying a drug rebate rule. To help pay for infrastructure spending, the legislation would delay the implementation of a controversial Trump administration rule that would radically change how drugs are priced and paid for in Medicare and Medicaid. It's expected to save $51 billion. What's your take on this?
This is not was this the whole thing Trump was talking about when he was talking about trying to negotiate purchasing of basically medicines, and negotiating with big pharma essentially to get lower prices? Is this along those same lines?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's good if it actually can work and hold through. I mean, that is one thing I will give Trump at least some credit for, was at least talking that talking point. Now, obviously, he wasn't able to get it to really flow through as far as negotiating. But then on the other hand, me being someone who was very much in favor of single payer healthcare at the same time, I still think it puts a bandage on a system that still needs reform. But that's been the theme of most things is, when someone like Bernie ran, ironically, you got Republicans defending Obamacare versus trying to tear it down, even though they still try to tear it down as well, too. But, Obamacare was bad enough to them. So single payer really scared them, like, okay, I guess we can live with it. So to me, it's putting a Band-Aid on a bigger issue.
Yeah. Funding for roads and bridges. The legislation calls for investing $110 billion for roads, bridges, and major infrastructure projects, according to an updated fact sheet from the White House. That's significantly less than $159 billion Biden initially requested in an American Jobs Plan. Included is $40 billion for bridge repair, replacement, and rehabilitation. The White House says it would be the single largest dedicated bridge investment since the construction of the interstate highway system, which started in the 1950s. The deal also contains $16 billion for major projects that would be too large or complex for traditional funding programs, according to the White House. $110 billion for roads, bridges, and major infrastructure, and then included is $40 billion for bridge repair. What I think hit about this is that a lot of your bridges were pretty much condemned. I don't even know why people even are able to drive on it. I find that to be very interesting. You had a few bridges that actually collapsed in the last few years. I think we just had one in Miami. Was it in Miami that a bridge collapsed? I think there was one outside of in VA, I think it was, Virginia.
Yeah, right outside of DC. Yeah, or in maybe even in right around DC. Yeah, that was one as well too.
Yeah, and so I guess this makes sense. Why they were neglected in the first place, I don't even know. What were they doing with all this money all this time? That's another story for another day. But I mean, if it has to be done, it has to be done. Either you're going to do it or you're not. And I think doing it is probably, especially after the collapse that happened in Florida, I would say that you would be crazy to vote against infrastructure spending in terms of bridges and major infrastructure projects and roads, especially with all these sinkholes popping up in places like Florida and whatnot. That's, no one's going to buck against that. So I don't have any qualms against that.
No, I agree. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. How much money, $1 trillion is a good chunk of change, obviously. But when you look at, Trump's $2 trillion tax cut, the amount of war money that's been spent on wars, it's like, and you listen to, some of the, how much money they're saying, like, this is the largest bridge program, since the Interstate Highway Commission. That's crazy to think about in the sense of, like I said, $1 trillion is a lot of money. But then, like I said, when you look at the other things that, we've spent money on, it's like that, wow, this is how much we're going to spend on our infrastructure. And it's this, amazing thing. It kind of shows how warped the priorities are. But yeah, I agree. It should have never got that bad in the first place. Lots of bridges that aren't necessarily condemned, but, are pretty close to it. I believe the American Society of Civil Engineers gives like American infrastructure as a whole like a D minus. So, I mean, like I said, it can only improve things. I think I heard a study somewhere that when you start looking at infrastructure, obviously one of the ways it pays back that people don't think about is just the amount of time that you're going to not have to spend in traffic through reduction in commute time because of things like flat tires, accidents, potholes, things like that. Like I said, bridges being collapsed and condemned. So, like I said, I agree. I hope it's enough. I don't know, have enough knowledge to know how much is truly needed, but I hope it's enough to truly, bring our infrastructure up to a place where a first world country's infrastructure should be from at least bridges standpoint.
Yeah. Money for transit and rail. The package would provide $39 billion to modernize public transit, according to the bill text. That's less than the $49 billion contained in an early bipartisan deal and $85 billion that Biden initially wanted to invest in modernizing transit systems and helping them expand to meet rider demand. The funds will repair and upgrade existing infrastructure, make stations accessible to all users, bring transit service to new communities, and modernize rail and bus fleets, including replacing thousands of vehicles with zero-emission models, according to the White House. I think this is necessary if you have growing cities, according to the census that we'll get into in a few minutes. You have to have mass transit systems in place, and I was surprised to see, how few it is. Places like Dallas that don't have a mass transit system, I thought that was pretty crazy. Big cities like that. So maybe those cities can start to taper out of their designs in terms of mass transit. In places like New York, obviously they have one of the biggest transit systems in the country. Boston, they have really the oldest transit system in the country. Those places are pretty well endowed in their capacity to have transit and rail. But the biggest question that we're trying to figure out is, when are we going to get high-speed rail? High-speed rail is going to be really important because China's putting out high-speed trains that are 200 miles an hour faster than anything that we have. I think the fastest one that we have, the Acceler train, I think that's 100 miles an hour at best. I think that's the fastest it goes.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
That's a very short distance.
Yeah, I'm not sure on specific speed, but I'll never forget reading an article where, in China, they're literally having to slow the trains down. Like, trains are going faster than they should be, like going over, I guess, the train speed limit, and the authorities literally having to crack down on them going too fast. Yeah, ours barely go 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, they're using mag rail, so it's a little bit different. The infrastructure is a little bit different, but ours, we're still using traditional rail system, and that's a little bit difficult to actually speed up. And so we're in this sort of dilemma where we want to increase the speed of the rail system, but at the same time, it's not capable of going faster than what it's already designed to do for the distance that it travels.
I'm
not a big fan. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of giving money to Amtrak. I think that if the service is not up to snuff and the business isn't working out for them, I think you should let them fail. They let everybody else fail in terms of smaller businesses. I just don't see why we have to use our tax dollars on Amtrak. Amtrak can't turn revenue. Go ahead.
No, it's funny you said that. Because the problem with Amtrak, they have a bad on-time rate. And the issue with that is they don't own a lot of the track. A lot of the track is owned by companies like BNSF, CSX, those who operate trains on the line. So anytime they run into a situation where, they're going to a switch yard or something like that, or, an area where another oncoming train is coming through, they always have to defer to those trains, and that affects their on-time rate. So that's where I was kind of like, well, what's in this? Is it just like, money for new engines, more routes, actually giving them some area where they can own their own track and increase the reliability and on-time rate. I think, for getting more clarity on what really it's gonna be will give better enlightenment there. But then, like you said, when you start talking about high-speed rail, like other countries are doing, that's not trains running on the track necessarily, the traditional type of track. Some are up in the air, running more on a platform, or some do run on track. But if I believe correctly, it may not be the same type of track. So I agree there that I'm definitely someone who would like to see high-speed rail, especially in some of these areas. I do know like places like they're working on, I don't know if it's high speed or not, but they are working on a train that goes from Dallas to Houston. That's in the works, and I believe it's going to be open the next year or two. So you are seeing some of that, and like you said, with the way the population is shifting towards cities, this is going to have to be something that you really focus on really, building out infrastructure that is sensible, that can get people from A to B, especially when you start looking at what the cost of living in all the cities and how it's going up. That's going to be huge for a high-speed train. If you could take a high-speed rail into the city, that'll just do well for easing housing affordability issues.
Yeah, last two pieces, upgraded airports, ports, and waterways. The legislation would invest $17 billion in port infrastructure and $25 billion in airports to address repair and maintenance backlogs, reduce congestion and emissions near ports and airports, and promote electrification and other low-carbon technologies, according to the White House. I think airports in the United States, outside of your major Atlanta, Houston, New York, LaGuardia and Kennedy, Logan International, LA Airport, San Fran Airport. Those airports are relatively new, so I'm not sure whose airports need to be really upgraded at all at this point, other than, because there's no detail to this, so I don't really know. Maintenance backlogs, I mean, what exactly does that mean? Like, what were they doing that they couldn't keep up with their backlogs, right? So I don't think that throwing money at it really makes a whole lot of sense, but they see it as a just cause. So
for me, I can't speak. I can speak somewhat like Atlanta. I don't think they have. I went through there last year, and they were doing construction. They're definitely making some major improvements. So, I think the airport's fine. It's the busiest in the world. So, obviously, kind of should be, kind of the gold standard. Obviously, I mean, from just a sheer nicety standpoint, maybe you can talk about upgrades inside, but I mean, I haven't run into any issues, major delays, and things like that. And for the other airports I've been through, you know, I've flown into DFW, flown into Orlando, Charlotte. I did probably about 8 years ago, Sky Harbor out in Phoenix. I've flown into Denver. So, I mean, when I went through them, I mean, I didn't see too much, like you said, old or aging type of infrastructure. Maybe this is more geared towards regional airports. I've flown out of Dulles as well too. You know, nothing, you know, outrageous there. I do know here, Reagan Airport, they are expanding it because, you know, it was one of those regional airports that I think at one time they were actually talking about closing down. So some expansion there too. So maybe there's some money in there for that. So, but I mean, I have heard people who have flown into other airports around the world. I believe it's either maybe Saudi Arabia or UAE or Turkey. I can't remember which one. They were building a super duper nice airport, I think, to try to rival Atlanta's airport and try to become the busiest in the world. So maybe there's some of that going on as well too. So I'm not too sure, other than, like I said, maybe some regional ones that need some major upgrades.
I think that was Singapore.
Oh, okay, it was Singapore. That's who it was.
Yeah. All right, let's get to the census. So 2020 census, it shows initially on the surface that America is becoming more diverse and less white. I see this as a natural occurrence, you know, that this was bound to happen at some point. The ruling class of people are not going to be in power for much longer. The country's going to become more brown, so to speak. So what's your take on any of this that's happening in terms of the census?
Yeah, I wasn't too surprised because I mainly attributed this to, hey, you know, baby boomers are disproportionately older and white. They're starting to retire, as well as, you know, some of them are starting to die off, as well as, I guess, the silent generation. Maybe some of those people are still here as well too. So to me, like I said, kind of natural progression. I think it'll be interesting going forward to see how the demographics play out, because you have to think it's not just a matter, when you're talking about at least voting patterns, it's not going to just matter necessarily what group grew. It's a matter of, you know, where they are geographically, because, you know, places like California, Texas, you know, that's where a large part, Florida, that's where the major, New York, I guess you can throw that into, your major Hispanic populations are in those areas. You know, 3 of the 4 of those states have gone blue. You know, obviously New York, California consistently stay blue. Texas is more of a swing state. Texas is becoming a swing state. Florida has already kind of been a swing state, even though Republicans have won at the last 2 presidential cycles. So, you know, where people are located geographically and where the changes occur, as far as a shrinking white population, a black population that, you know, if you go by the census data, is kind of a more stagnant, and then, you know, a growing Hispanic and Asian population. You know, it'll be interesting to see, like I said, the geographic areas of where that is occurring, and then what the implications are on the electoral map, at least from a federal level.
Yeah, and a lot of the trending is showing that the growth is happening more in the South than it is in the North. Around that Atlanta, no, I shouldn't say Atlanta, but that Georgia, North Carolina, so Raleigh, that triangle, Atlanta, those areas are starting to see a lot of black growth, so to speak.
I'm sure Nashville saw a lot too.
Yeah, that little corridor, anywhere on that map shows that there's a strong university system there. Anywhere there's a Federal Reserve, it seems like black people seem to be gravitating way more to that than not. And so Atlanta is known for having the Atlanta Fed there. and major Black universities. So I think that's where you're starting to see a lot of that growth come from. And you're starting to see a lot more Black people who do want to retire at 59 plus come into the South because they can get more bang for their buck in terms of retirement spending. So
yeah, if I remember correctly, I believe Phoenix was the fastest growing metro, which wasn't a surprise to me, just because of, you've heard of I guess the Sun Valley, and a lot of people moving out of California for some tech jobs migrating there. So I believe it passed Philadelphia as, I want to say, like the 5th largest city. So kind of what you said, growth kind of happening out west and in the South, and then slowing rates, I guess you could say, in the Northeast, coupled with the Midwest seeing declines as well. I will say with the Northeast, and maybe that's changing some with places like Houston, but I still associate the Northeast with a lot of immigrants still coming to places like New York, migrating down the coastline. So, to me, that could be something that, this could just be more of, hey, people moving, and, Trump's, recent anti-immigrant stance may have slowed some of that down as people coming. But to me, I think most significantly, I think the area that's going to be hit hardest and not really recover is the Midwest, just because of, that was really built around manufacturing. And obviously those jobs have either been outsourced or automation has replaced them. So, watching that dynamic going forward, as well as, like I said, the implications of where people are moving. Because also, like I know they said Hispanics were growing the fastest. Hispanics is a diverse group. We kind of talk about it like it's a monolith, but you've got Hispanics who are like Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, and places like New York City. Cubans down in Florida. Mexicans in Texas, and then places like California. You've got Mexicans, but then as well as like Guatemalans, people like So all of those people may vote a little bit differently. So I think when you start talking about the political implications of what this means, I heard a panel talking about it that, hey, demographics is not destiny. Dems are really going to have to come up with a message that makes sense if you're going to get these people to vote, which, I hope that message is something that naturally Black people just fall into the fold of that message, as well as being something more progressive. But, I think we've talked about with people in other spaces on here on YouTube that, you have seen a rise of sort of a conservative Latino vote as well too. So how these numbers start shifting around will be very interesting to watch from the political map. Like I said, where it's occurring geographically is going to make the big change. So
yeah, Black people are going to have to figure out how to deal with coalition politics and how to actually come up with an agenda. What is the Black agenda? I know the Congressional Black Caucus is really good at doing that annual report, but we have to think about between 2021 and 2030. We're already into the decade, 1 year into the decade. What's going to be the game plan from now until 2030? That's where all of these numbers start to really make sense. If Charles Breaux wrote a piece about Black people should move down south, because that's where your numbers are strongest. And he wrote that before the census even came out. So maybe he's seeing some trends that he thinks may be in Black people's favor. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think the other dynamic, that you have to keep in mind is, what the Black community looks like, say, in 10 years. Is it something, or are we kind of, in the sense, are people sort of making the assumption that you're going to still have this homogeneous community when you're looking at the backdrop of, hey, people under 18 are already majority people of color, and then what does that look like? Does that mean that, hey, communities sort of stick and sort of remain homogeneous, or do you see more of a Black community that continues to become more and more mixed, and you have people who are biracial? Does that grow, and that sort of becomes its own category, or does this community for the most part sort of still resemble, a Black community of what people have traditionally viewed? African immigrants, where do they fit in this as well too, as far as their demographics and the influence they play. So I think people also have to just understand and take into account that Black America could be diversifying as well in this sense.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that that's where the intellectuals, need to really sit down and have a conversation about what the critical impact is going to be and what the benefit is going to be out of all of this. That's my final thought. You have any final thoughts?
Only thing I would say is with the census data too is you have to look at the speculation I've heard from some people is that people who are Black did not participate as much as should have, so there could be some implications there from a funding standpoint, in the sense of, hey, maybe people who are Black have been undercounted a little bit. So I think that has to be taken into account as well. But I think overall, redistricting, that's going to obviously have a big impact on Senate and the House seats. And I think people just have to be aware of process and what this means, like you said, going forward as far as a political agenda. Because I was listening to some people talk, and they were saying if these numbers continue, you're looking at, and I can't remember what the cutoff was, but you're looking at Asians actually surpassing the Black community as well as far as population. So, like you said, as far as an agenda, now is the time if people really got to figure out, get organized and what you're really pursuing, because if people are already complaining about, they feel like Hispanics are getting more or Asians are getting more, and they continue to not organize, and you fall to the third largest minority group from the second largest minority group, it's only going to be harder to play coalition politics. So that's kind of my final thought is people are going to have to really rally around what they're looking for and get involved, get in the game.
Like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on Twitter at brothers_podcast.